Table 27. In the kitchen. I stared at the escort card in my hand, the elegant calligraphy seeming to mock me as I read it again. Around me, guests in formal attire clutched their own cards, excitedly discussing their proximity to the head table. My fingers trembled slightly as I flipped the card over, certain there must be some mistake. But there it was. My name, Emma Walker, assigned to the kitchen, hidden away from the celebration I had poured my heart, soul, and bank account into for the past year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And that's when I knew. The whispers had been true all along. In my sister's eyes, I was, and would always be, an afterthought. I'd always been the responsible one. While my younger sister Olivia flitted from passion to passion, boyfriend to boyfriend, dream to dream, I was the steady rock of the family, the dependable daughter, the one who stayed in Seattle when everyone else wanted to leave. "Emma, you just get things done," my mother would say. Not quite a compliment, more a statement of fact. As if my reliability was my defining trait, useful but unremarkable. When Olivia announced her engagement to Nathan, her boyfriend of just 8 months, I was genuinely happy for her. Nathan seemed kind, stable, and genuinely in love with my free-spirited sister. Their whirlwind romance had surprised everyone, but it felt right. What didn't feel right was the wedding Olivia envisioned. An extravagant affair at Pinecrest Estate, complete with a champagne tower, custom-designed floral arrangements, and a guest list that rivaled a small concert. "It's going to be perfect," Olivia had gushed during our Sunday family dinner, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured excitedly. "We'll have the ceremony overlooking the mountains, dinner in the grand ballroom, and dancing under the stars on the terrace." I had smiled, genuinely thrilled to see her so happy, but then came the words that would set everything in motion. "The only problem," my father had said, swirling his wine thoughtfully, "is that Pinecrest costs a fortune. Your mother and I can contribute, but not that much." Olivia's face had fallen, and I felt a familiar tug in my chest, the same one I'd felt my entire life whenever my sister was disappointed. Before I could stop myself, I heard my own voice. "I can help." The words hung in the air as everyone turned to look at me. "Emma, that's sweet," my mother had said, her tone suggesting I couldn't possibly have enough to make a difference, "but we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars." What my family didn't know was that my little website business had blossomed into a thriving digital marketing agency. While they still thought of it as my hobby, I had quietly built something substantial. Something that could, in fact, cover most of Olivia's dream wedding. "I know," I had said simply. "I can help. Significantly." The shock on their faces had been worth every penny I was about to spend. And spend I did. Over the next 12 months, I wrote check after check. The venue deposit, the caterer, the photographer, the flowers. Each time with the same understanding. This was my gift to my sister, but not one to be announced publicly. Olivia would have her perfect day, and my parents wouldn't drain their retirement. "You're too generous," my best friend Megan had said. One evening, watching me pore over vendor contracts at my kitchen table. "Does Olivia even realize how much you're contributing?" I'd shrugged, signing another check. "It doesn't matter. She's my sister. I want her to have this." That was my first mistake, assuming reciprocity, assuming that my generosity would translate to inclusion, to appreciation. I should have known better. The weekend of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, crisp autumn air, clear skies, and leaves just beginning to turn gold and crimson against the backdrop of the Cascade Mountains. I arrived at Pinecrest Estate early, ready to help with last-minute details. My car was loaded with emergency supplies, fashion tape, extra hairpins, stain remover, backup makeup, and a small sewing kit. Always prepared. That was Emma Walker. The estate was more beautiful than I remembered from our planning visits. Stone pathways wound through manicured gardens, and the main building, a restored 19th century mansion, gleamed in the morning. Light. Inside, staff bustled about, transforming the already elegant ballroom into a fairy tale setting. I found Olivia in the bridal suite, surrounded by her friends from college. Not her bridesmaids. I wasn't one of those either. That had stung, but I'd swallowed my hurt. It would be weird to have my older sister as a bridesmaid, Olivia had explained. Besides, you'll be too busy making sure everything runs smoothly, right? Right. Always right. Emma! Olivia exclaimed when she saw me, her face lighting up. She looked beautiful already, even in her silk robe with her hair half done. Thank God you're here. The florist delivered the wrong shade of peonies, and Mom is freaking out. Not, I'm so happy to see you, or thank you for making all this possible. Just another problem for dependable Emma to solve. And solve it I did. I spent the next 6 hours running interference between vendors, calming my mother's nerves and ensuring that every detail was perfect. I barely had time to get dressed before the ceremony, slipping into my sage green dress in a spare bathroom rather than the bridal suite where I might have been an intrusion. The ceremony was beautiful, objectively perfect. As Olivia floated down the aisle on our father's arm, I felt a genuine swell of happiness. My sister, radiant in her custom gown that I had paid for, marrying a man who adored her, surrounded by friends and family in this stunning setting that I had secured. In that moment, every check I'd written felt worth it. It wasn't until the reception that the cracks began to show. I followed the crowd from the ceremony space to the grand ballroom, where escort cards were arranged alphabetically on a table adorned with more of those contested peonies. I waited patiently in line, making small talk with distant relatives and Olivia's college friends. When I reached the front, I scanned the table for Walker, Emma. The woman managing the table, Sophia, the wedding planner, faltered when she saw me. "Oh, Emma," she said, her professional smile slipping slightly. "Let me find yours." She rifled through the remaining cards, her discomfort growing visible. Finally, she pulled one from the very end. "Here you are," she said, not quite, meeting my eyes as she handed it over. Table 27. I frowned, glancing at the table map displayed nearby. There were only 25 tables in the ballroom. "There must be a mistake," I said, keeping my voice light. "I don't see table 27 on the map." Sophia's professional mask cracked further. It's actually in the adjacent room, the kitchen annex." The kitchen. They had seated me in the kitchen. For a moment, I stood frozen, the card in my hand. Around me, guests continued to collect their assignments, exclaiming with delight as they discovered their proximity to the head table or their placement with friends. "There has to be a mistake," I repeated, more to myself than to Sophia. She looked genuinely pained now. "I'm so sorry, Emma. The seating chart came directly from Olivia and your mother. I assumed you knew." But I didn't know. I hadn't known that my contribution of nearly $60,000, more than half the cost of this entire wedding, had earned me a seat in the kitchen, out of sight. With the vendors and a few distant relatives, no one had wanted to exclude but didn't want to see either. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of being the reliable one, the one who sacrificed, the one who gave without expectation of return. All of it crystallized into a single, clarifying thought. Enough. I tucked the escort card into my clutch and made my way to the bar. If I was going to process this, I needed a drink. "Champagne, please," I told the bartender, who smiled sympathetically. Perhaps he could see something in my expression, a slight tremor in my voice. As I sipped the excellent champagne that I had selected and paid for, I surveyed the room. Round tables perfectly set with fine china and crystal glassware. Centerpieces of garden roses and, yes, peonies in multi-level arrangements that caught the light from the chandeliers. At the front, a head table where Olivia and Nathan would sit with their wedding party. My parents would be at table 1, directly in front, along with Nathan's parents and the siblings of the groom. But not me. Not the sister of the bride who had made it all possible. I spotted my mother across the room, accepting compliments on the beautiful wedding with gracious nods, as if she had been the architect of this perfection. My father stood beside her, chest puffed with pride, neither of them looking for me. My phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Megan. "How's it going? Is everything as perfect as you made it?" I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. How could I explain that after everything I'd done, I wasn't even considered worthy of sitting in the same room as my family? That I'd been relegated to the kitchen, out of sight and out of mind? Before I could decide what to say, a familiar voice behind me said, "Emma, is that you?" I turned to find Daniel Harrison, my college boyfriend, looking exactly as handsome as he had when we were 22, just with distinguished touches of gray at his temples now. "Daniel," I said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were invited." He smiled, that same crooked smile that had once made my heart race. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nathan and I worked together. Small world, right? I had no idea the bride was your sister until I saw the program. For a moment, I forgot my hurt, caught up in the pleasant surprise of seeing him again. Daniel and I had been serious once, planning futures and dreaming big dreams, before life and careers pulled us in different directions. Our breakup had been mutual but painful. One of those rare relationships that ended not because of problems, but because of timing. "It's really good to see you," I said, meaning it. "How have you been?" As Daniel caught me up on the last decade of his life, I felt myself relaxing for the first time that day. Here was someone with no agenda, no expectations, just genuine interest in my life and thoughts. We were deep in conversation when the call came for guests to find their seats for dinner. "I'm at table 12, Daniel said, glancing at his card. "You?" I hesitated, embarrassment washing over me. "Actually, I've been placed at a special table," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. "Special how? You're the sister of the bride." "Special is in the kitchen," I said, forcing a small laugh that didn't reach my eyes. "Apparently, family ties only get you so far." His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "The kitchen? That can't be right." "Oh, but it is," I said, finding strength in his indignation on my behalf. "Quite right, in fact. A deliberate choice." Daniel shook his head. I don't even know what to say. Want me to cause a scene? I'm pretty good at making a dignified fuss." That made me smile, a genuine one this time. Tempting, but no, I need to handle this my way. "Well, whatever you decide, I'm on your side," he said, squeezing my arm gently before heading to his table. "Find me later?" I nodded, watching him go, a small comfort in the knowledge that at least one person in this room saw my worth. As guests settled into their seats and servers began pouring wine, I made my way toward the kitchen, escort card clutched in my hand like evidence of a crime. With each step, my resolve strengthened. I had spent my entire life being the good daughter, the supportive sister, the reliable one. I had given and given and given, expecting nothing in return. Nothing except basic respect. Nothing except acknowledgement of my existence. Nothing except a seat at the damn table. As I pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen, the sounds of the reception muffled behind me. I knew something had to change. Not tomorrow, not after the wedding, but now. Tonight, Because sometimes the only way to be seen is to make it impossible for others to look away. The kitchen was a flurry of activity. Servers arranging salad plates, chefs putting final touches on the main course, bartenders restocking trays of champagne. In one corner, I spotted table 27. True to Sophia's word, it was set up in the annex, a small area where the staff would normally take breaks. 3 older people I vaguely recognized as distant relatives of Nathan's sat there already, looking confused and slightly uncomfortable. A 4th chair waited for me. Emma Walker, sister of the bride, financier of dreams, now relegated to dining among the clatter of dishes and shouts of service. I approached the table, smiled politely at the occupants, and then, without sitting down, turned and walked straight back out of the kitchen. No, I would not accept this. The confident click of my heels against the marble floor felt like punctuation marks to my thoughts. For once in my life, I wasn't going to smooth things over. I wasn't going to make it easier for everyone else at my own expense. As I re-entered the ballroom, the string quartet was playing softly, and the gentle hum of conversation filled the air. I spotted Olivia and Nathan at the head table, laughing with their friends. My parents at table 1 accepting more compliments from Nathan's family. I took a deep breath and walked directly to the head table. "Emma," Olivia said when she noticed me, her smile faltering slightly. "Is something wrong with the kitchen? Do we need to talk to the catering manager?" So she knew. She had known all along where I was seated. "Nothing's wrong with the kitchen," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I'm not sitting there." Olivia's eyes widened, and she glanced quickly at our mother, who was now watching the exchange with barely concealed dismay. "Emma, please," Olivia whispered. "It's my wedding day. We had to make some tough decisions with the seating and—" "Tough decisions," I repeated, cutting her off. "Like seating your only sister, the person who paid for more than half of this wedding, in the kitchen?" A hush fell over the head table. Nathan looked genuinely shocked, his gaze darting between me and his new wife. "What do you mean, paid for half the wedding?" he asked, turning to Olivia. "I thought your parents covered what we couldn't." Olivia's face drained of color. "Emma, this isn't the time or place. When would be the right time, Olivia? After I eat my dinner in the kitchen? After I watch everyone else celebrate in this beautiful venue that I secured? After I go home alone, knowing that I wasn't even worth acknowledgement in your speech?" My voice was steady, but I could feel tears threatening. Not tears of sadness, but of long-suppressed anger. My mother appeared at my side, her grip tight. On my elbow. "Emma, you're making a scene," she hissed. "Let's talk about this later." I pulled my arm free. "I've spent my entire life waiting for later, Mom. Later, when Olivia doesn't need all the attention. Later, when my accomplishments might matter to you. Later, when I might actually be treated like a member of this family rather than an ATM. With feelings." The string quartet had stopped playing. Around us, guests were pretending not to stare, but the silence in the room was deafening. "What exactly are you saying?" Nathan asked, his confusion giving way to something harder as he looked at Olivia. "I hadn't planned to do this. I truly hadn't. When I wrote those checks, I had done so with love, with no expectation of public recognition. But being physically removed from the celebration, hidden away in the kitchen like a shameful secret, that was a bridge too far. "I'm saying," I said clearly, "that I paid for the venue, I paid for the flowers, I paid for the photographer, the band, and yes, even that champagne everyone's enjoying. $60,000 to be exact." Gasps rippled through the nearby tables as guests abandoned all pretense of not listening. "And in return," I continued, "I was seated in the kitchen, because apparently that's what I'm worth to all of you." Olivia's face crumpled. "Emma, I didn't know it was that much. Mom and Dad said you were helping with some of the smaller details. I turned to my parents, who at least had the grace to look ashamed. Is that what you told her? That my contribution was minor? My father cleared his throat. We didn't think it was necessary to get into specifics. Of course not, I said, a bitter laugh escaping, because if Olivia knew the truth, she might have felt obligated to treat me like family. The weight of years of being sidelined, of being taken for granted, of being useful but never precious, pressed down on me. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for a seat at this wedding. I was fighting for my place in this family, for recognition of my worth beyond what I could provide. Emma, Nathan said, rising from his seat, his expression genuinely concerned. I had no idea. If I had known, you would have what? I asked, not unkindly. Insisted I be treated with basic dignity? That shouldn't require your intervention, Nathan. That should be the bare minimum. Olivia was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. I thought you were helping because you wanted to, not because you expected something in return. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Expected something in return? I repeated, incredulous. Olivia, I expected nothing, except to be treated like your sister. To not be hidden away like something shameful on the day I helped create for you. Is that really asking too much? The silence that followed was profound. Around us, guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, witnesses to a family fracture laid bare. My mother tried once more. Emma, please, you're ruining Olivia's special day. And there it was, the familiar refrain of my childhood. Don't outshine your sister. Don't upset your sister. Don't take attention away from your sister. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. No, Mom. You all did that when you decided I wasn't even worth a seat in the same room. I turned back to Olivia and Nathan. I truly want you both to be happy. I hope your marriage is everything you dream it will be. But I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being useful but invisible. And I'm definitely done sitting in the kitchen. With that, I turned and walked away, head high, ignoring the murmurs that rose in my wake. As I passed table 12, Daniel stood up, a silent question in his eyes. Without hesitation, I held out my hand to him. Want to get out of here? I asked. His smile was answer enough. As we walked out of Pinecrest Estate together, the weight of expectations, of always being the responsible one, of giving without receiving, seemed to lift from my shoulders. Tomorrow, there would be fallout. Tomorrow, there would be angry calls and tearful recriminations. Tomorrow, I would have to decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with my family going forward. But tonight, I had finally claimed my place at the table. Even if it meant flipping the table over entirely. The Seattle night air felt crisp against my skin as Daniel and I walked away from Pinecrest Estate. Behind us, the twinkling lights of the wedding reception continued to glow, but they seemed to belong to another world now, one I had just decisively left behind. So, Daniel said, his hand still warm in mine, that was quite an exit. I laughed, a slightly hysterical sound that surprised even me. I didn't plan it, any of it. I believe you, he said, slowing our pace as we reached the parking lot. For what it's worth, I think you were magnificent in there. I stopped walking and turned to face him, suddenly unsure what I was doing. The adrenaline that had carried me through my confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving me shaky and vulnerable. I just blew up my sister's wedding reception, I said, the reality of it hitting me all at once. Oh God, I actually did that. Daniel's expression softened. You didn't blow up anything. You told the truth after being treated appallingly. There's a difference. I shook my head, conflicting emotions washing over me. Truth or not, I just created a scene that everyone in there is going to remember for years. I don't do things like that. I'm the one who fixes situations, not the one who causes them. Maybe that's exactly why it needed to happen, Daniel said gently. Maybe you've been fixing things for so long that everyone forgot you have feelings too. His words landed with unexpected weight. He was right, of course. For as long as I could remember, I had been the family problem solver, the mediator, the one who made sacrifices to keep the peace. And somewhere along the way, that role had become my identity, not just to my family, but to myself. I need a drink, I said finally. A real one, not wedding champagne. Daniel smiled. I know just the place. My car's over here. 20. Minutes later, we were settled in a corner booth at Harbor Point, a quiet waterfront bar far enough from the wedding venue that we were unlikely to encounter any guests who might have followed our dramatic exit. The bar was dimly lit, with exposed brick walls and windows that offered a view of Elliott Bay, the water a dark expanse dotted with the lights of passing boats. As I sipped my whiskey sour, I felt myself gradually unwinding, the tension in my shoulders easing incrementally. Daniel, to his credit, didn't press me to talk. He simply sat across from me, a comforting presence as I sorted through my thoughts. I've never done anything like that before, I said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Standing up for myself like that, I mean. How does it feel? He asked. I considered the question, rolling my glass between my palms. Terrifying. Exhilarating. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I'm not sure yet if I'm flying or falling. From where I was standing, it looked a lot like flying, Daniel said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I felt a rush of gratitude for his presence, for the strange stroke of fate that had placed him at my sister's wedding on this of all nights. Daniel had always seen me clearly, even back in college when I was still trying to figure out who I was. That was part of what had made our relationship special, and what had made its end so painful. How did we lose touch, Daniel? I asked suddenly. After everything we were to each other? He looked surprised by the change in subject, but he went with it. Life, I guess. You moved to New York for that internship. I stayed in Seattle. We said we'd make it work, but long distance is hard, and we were young. And eventually it seemed easier to let go than to keep fighting for something that might never work out. I finished for him. I remember. Daniel nodded, a shadow of old pain crossing his face. For what it's worth, I've thought about you over the years. Wondered how you were doing, if you were happy. And now you know, I said with a rueful smile. I built a successful business, made enough money to finance my sister's dream wedding, and still somehow ended up seated in the kitchen. That's not all I know, Daniel countered. I also know you had the courage to stand up and demand better, and that's no small thing, Emma. My phone, which I had silenced after leaving the reception, buzzed insistently in my purse. I ignored it, but it immediately started buzzing again. You should probably check that, Daniel said. It might be important. With a sigh, I fished out my phone. 15 missed calls and over 30 text messages flashed on the screen. Most were from my mother and Olivia, but there were also several from Megan, who must have heard about what happened. I scrolled through the texts from my family, each one more guilt-inducing than the last. Mom. Emma, come back right now. We need to fix this. Olivia. How could you do this to me on my wedding day? You've ruined everything. Mom. Your sister is in tears. I hope you're happy with yourself. Dad. Your mother is beside herself. Call immediately. Olivia. Everyone is talking about it. Nathan's family is shocked. This is so humiliating. The messages continued, in the same vein, all focused on how my actions had affected them, with not a single acknowledgement of what had driven me to that point. No recognition of the hurt they had caused. No apology for treating me as less than. Just anger that I had disrupted the carefully constructed narrative of family harmony they preferred to maintain. I set the phone face down on the table, fighting back tears. "That bad?" Daniel asked quietly. "Worse," I said, my voice tight. "According to my family, I'm a selfish monster who ruined Olivia's perfect day out of spite. Are you going to respond?" I stared at my phone, considering. "Not tonight. I can't. I can't handle their anger right now, not when mine is still so fresh." Just then, a new message came through from Megan. "Just heard what happened. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" At least one person's first concern was for me, not for the disruption I had caused. I quickly texted back, "I'm okay. Having a drink with an old friend. We'll call you tomorrow." Her response was immediate. "Proud of you." Those 3 simple words nearly undid me. When was the last time anyone in my family had said they were proud of me? When had my accomplishments, my successful business, my independence, my generosity, ever been celebrated the way Olivia's every minor achievement was? "You know what the worst part is?" I said, looking up at Daniel. "I really thought I was okay with it. With being the invisible one, the responsible one, the one who gives without expecting anything in return. I told myself it was maturity, that I was above needing validation or recognition." I laughed bitterly. But it turns out I'm just human after all, and it hurts. It really, really hurts to know that the people who should love you the most see you as an afterthought. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. "You deserve better, Emma. You always have." His touch was warm, grounding, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this moment of painful clarity. We sat like that for a long time, my hand in his, the sounds of the bar fading into the background as I tried to make sense of what came next. "I don't know what to do now," I admitted finally. "I can't take back what I said, and honestly, I don't want to. But I also don't know how to move forward with my family after this." "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," Daniel said. "Give yourself time to process what happened. The decisions will come when they need to." As if on cue, my phone lit up with another call from my mother. This time, I turned it off completely. "You're right," I said, feeling a strange sense of liberation in the simple act of disconnecting. Tonight is about just breathing. Tomorrow, I can start figuring out what all this means. Daniel smiled, lifting his glass in a small toast. To breathing, then, and to the Emma Walker who finally decided to take up space. I clinked my glass against his, allowing myself a genuine smile for the first time that evening. To taking up space, I echoed. We stayed at the bar for another hour, carefully avoiding further discussion of the wedding as we caught each other up on the past decade of our lives. Daniel told me about his work in sustainable architecture, his travels, his brief, ill-fated engagement 3 years ago. I shared stories about building my business, my cozy craftsman house, the community garden project I volunteered with. It felt easy, familiar, like slipping into a favorite sweater forgotten at the back of a closet. When we finally left, Daniel insisted on driving me home. "I'm not about to put you in a rideshare after the night you've had," he said firmly. The drive to my neighborhood was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled up in front of my house, the porch light I'd left on earlier cast a warm glow over the front steps. "Thank you," I said, turning to face him, "for being there tonight, for getting me out of there when I needed an escape route, for seeing me." His smile was soft in the dim light of the car. "I've always seen you, Emma. That never changed." The weight of those words settled between us, heavy with implication. For a moment, I thought he might lean in, that this surreal night might end with the kind of kiss that belonged in movies. But instead, he simply squeezed my hand once more and said, Get some rest. And call me tomorrow if you need a friend, okay? I nodded, suddenly unable to trust my voice. With a final squeeze of his hand, I got out of the car and walked to my front door, feeling his eyes on me until I was safely inside. The house was quiet, a welcome contrast to the tumult of emotions I'd experienced over the past few hours. I kicked off my heels in the entryway, dropped my clutch on the side table, and made my way to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink, staring out the window into my darkened backyard. What had I done? The enormity of it washed over me again, but this time the panic was tempered with something else. A quiet, steely certainty that I had done what was necessary, what was long overdue. For too long, I had accepted the scraps of attention and affection my family deigned to offer me. I had convinced myself that my worth lay in what I could provide, in the problems I could solve, in the ways I could make myself useful. But a seat, in the kitchen, that was where I drew the line. That was where I finally said, enough. I drained my water glass and headed upstairs to my bedroom. As I carefully removed the sage green dress I'd chosen so thoughtfully for the wedding, a dress no one had complimented, I realized, my phone pinged with a text notification. I'd turned it back on out of habit when I entered the house, a reflex, born of years of being the responsible one, always available in case of emergency. Bracing myself for another angry message from my mother or Olivia, I was surprised to see Daniel's name on the screen instead. Just making sure you got in okay. Also, for what it's worth, I think the Emma who stood up for herself tonight is even more incredible than the Emma I remember. Sleep well. We'll talk soon. Something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. It had been a long time since anyone had called me incredible, and longer still since I'd believed it might be true. For the first time that night, the tears I'd been holding back spilled over, but they weren't tears of anger or hurt. They were tears of release, of recognition, of something that felt dangerously like hope. I fell asleep that night with my phone clutched in my hand, Daniel's message the last thing I saw before drifting off. And despite everything, despite the bridges I had potentially burned and the painful conversations that lay ahead, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows I'd forgotten to close in my emotional exhaustion. For a blissful moment, I lay in bed, mind empty of everything except appreciation for the warm light and the soft sheets. Then reality crashed back in. The wedding, the confrontation, the aftermath. I reached for my phone, steeling myself for the onslaught I knew would be waiting. Sure enough, there were dozens of new messages and missed calls. My family had been busy overnight, it seemed. But before I could dive into that particular cesspool, my doorbell rang. An insistent, repeated press that suggested whoever was on my porch wasn't planning to leave until I answered. With a groan, I pulled on a robe and padded downstairs, mentally preparing myself for the possibility of facing my mother or Olivia in person. But when I opened the door, it was Megan who stood there, holding a tray with 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled promisingly of pastries. "I figured you could use reinforcements," she said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Also, your yard is currently hosting a stakeout. Your mom's been parked across the street for at least 20 minutes. What? I followed her to the kitchen, peering out the front window as I went. Sure enough, my mother's silver Lexus was parked directly opposite my house. "Oh, for the love of—" "Ignore her," Megan advised, setting down her offerings on the kitchen island. "At least until you've had caffeine and sugar. I brought your favorite, hazelnut latte and those almond croissants from Petit Pierre." "You're an angel," I said gratefully, reaching for the coffee. "A mind-reading angel." Megan hoisted herself onto one of the counter stools, fixing me with a gaze that was equal parts concerned and curious. "So, are we going to talk about how You went full scorched earth at your sister's wedding reception and then disappeared with a hot mystery man? Or are you planning to make me pry the details out of you, bit by torturous bit? Despite everything, I laughed. Not much of a mystery, actually. That was Daniel Harrison. Megan's eyes widened. Wait, Daniel? College sweetheart Daniel? The one who got away Daniel? The very same, I confirmed, taking a fortifying sip of my latte. Well, that's a plot twist I wasn't expecting, Megan said, clearly delighted by this new information. But don't think you can distract me with romantic reunions. What happened at that wedding, Emma? I got 12 texts from mutual friends saying you caused some kind of scene, but no one could agree on what actually went down. I sighed, sinking onto the stool opposite her. They seated me in the kitchen, Meg. After everything I did to make that wedding happen, after all the money I spent, they put me at a table in the kitchen, out of sight, like I was something to be ashamed of. Megan's expression darkened. They did what? Table 27. In the kitchen annex, I confirmed, bitter amusement creeping into my voice. With the catering staff and a few distant relatives no one wanted to invite but couldn't exclude. Those absolute... Megan cut herself off, visibly struggling to contain her anger. And let me guess, when you called them on it, they made it your fault somehow? Got it in one, I said, pulling a croissant from the bag and breaking off a piece. According to the flood of texts I've received, I'm selfish. I'm attention-seeking. I've ruined the most important day of Olivia's life. And, my personal favorite, I've made my mother physically ill with stress. Classic Patricia Walker, Megan muttered. She'd been my friend since high school and had witnessed more than her fair share of my family's dynamics over the years. So, what exactly did you do? I need the full scene, with dialogue if possible. I recounted the events of the previous night, from the moment I discovered my table assignment to my dramatic exit with Daniel. As I spoke, Megan's expressions ranged from outrage to satisfaction to a kind of fierce pride. Good for you, she said when I finished. Seriously, Emma, I've been waiting for you to stand up to them for 20 years. It's about damn time. It doesn't feel good, though, I admitted. I mean, yes, there's a part of me that's relieved to have finally said what I've been thinking for so long. But there's also this voice in my head saying I should have just sucked it up, like I always do. That I should have sat at that kitchen table with a smile and not made waves. That voice, Megan said firmly, is the result of a lifetime of conditioning. Your family trained you to prioritize their feelings over yours, to be the fixer, the mediator, the one who sacrifices. But you know what? That voice is wrong. Before I could respond, my phone started buzzing again, my mother calling for what had to be the 20th time since last night. You should probably talk to her eventually, Megan said, though her tone suggested she thought otherwise. But only when you're ready, and only on your terms. I stared at my mother's name on the screen, a strange calm settling over me. You're right, I said, and to both our surprise, I answered the call, putting it on speaker. Emma? Finally? My mother's voice came through, tense and clipped. I'm outside your house. We need to talk about what happened last night. Good morning to you too, Mom, I said evenly. Don't be flippant. This is serious. You've upset your sister beyond words. You've embarrassed our entire family in front of all our friends and Nathan's family, and your father and I. Are you still outside my house? I interrupted. There was a brief pause. Yes, and I'm not. Leaving until we've sorted this out. I locked eyes with Megan, who gave me an encouraging nod. Okay, I said. Then I'll come outside. But I want to be clear about something first. I'm not apologizing for what I said last night. We can talk about how it was said and when, but not about whether it needed to be said, because it did. Emma, my mother began, that warning tone. in her voice that had intimidated me all my life. "No, Mom. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost see her weighing her options, deciding whether it was worth maintaining her pride at the risk of prolonging the conflict. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll wait for you out here." I ended the call and turned to Megan. "Well, this should be fun. Want me to stay? I can lurk menacingly in the background, maybe glare from a window." I smiled gratefully. "Thanks, but I think I need to do this alone. Besides, if things get ugly, having a witness might make her behave better." "Or worse," Megan pointed out. "You know how she gets when she thinks she's being judged." That was true enough. My mother had always been intensely concerned with appearances, with maintaining the facade of the perfect family regardless of what was happening beneath the surface. It was part of what made last night's confrontation so shocking to her, not just the content of what I'd said, but the fact that I'd said it publicly, where others could hear. "Either way," I said, standing and tightening the belt of my robe, "it's time I stopped being afraid of her reactions." Megan reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, you know that? And whatever happens out there, I've got your back." I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for her steadfast friendship. "I know. That means everything." With a deep breath, I headed for the front door, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. As confrontations went, this one promised to be even more difficult than last night's, less fueled by adrenaline and righteousness, more complicated by the light of day and the weight of family history. But I was ready. For the first time in my life, I was truly ready to stand up for myself, not in the heat of the moment, but in the cold clarity of morning. My mother was standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance, at odds with the early hour and the circumstances. When she saw me, her expression tightened, eyes scanning me from head to toe with that familiar look of assessment and subtle disapproval. "You couldn't have gotten dressed first?" she asked by way of greeting. I smiled thinly. "Good morning to you too, Mom. How was the rest of the wedding reception?" She flinched slightly, and I felt a pang of guilt, quickly followed by irritation at myself for feeling guilty at all. I hadn't ruined Olivia's wedding. I had simply refused to accept being treated as less than family at a family event. There was a difference, and it was time my mother recognized it. "We need to talk about what you did," she said, ignoring my question. "And what about what you did?" I countered. "Do we need to talk about that too? Or are we just focusing on my part in this mess?" My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your sister is devastated, Emma. Everyone was talking about your outburst instead of celebrating her day. Nathan's family was shocked. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it was for all of us? Almost as embarrassing as being seated in the kitchen at my own sister's wedding?" I suggested. "Or finding out that my parents had downplayed my financial contribution to make it seem like a minor detail instead of more than half the total cost." "We were trying to protect Olivia's feelings," my mother said defensively. "She would have felt terrible if she knew how much you were spending." "Would she, though?" I asked, genuinely curious. Because when I told her last night, she seemed more upset about being publicly embarrassed than about the fact that I'd been relegated to the kitchen despite my generosity. My mother sighed heavily, the kind of sigh she'd perfected over the years to convey her deep disappointment in my failure to understand what she considered obvious. "You've always been so dramatic about your place in this family, Emma. Always. Keeping score, always feeling slighted. It's exhausting." The casual dismissal of my feelings, so familiar and yet still so painful, ignited a fresh wave of anger. "Dramatic. Is that what you call it when I notice that Olivia's every achievement is celebrated while mine are barely acknowledged? When I point out that her needs are always prioritized over mine? When I finally Finally say enough after being literally hidden away at an event I largely paid for? That's not fair, my mother protested. We've always been proud of you. Have you? Because I can't remember the last time you said so. I can't remember the last time my accomplishments were the center of a family dinner conversation, or when my feelings were considered when making plans. My mother crossed her arms, defensive. You're so independent, Emma. You always have been. You don't need the validation that Olivia does. And there it was, the heart of the issue, laid bare on my front sidewalk for all to see. In my mother's eyes, my strength, my self-sufficiency, was not an achievement to be celebrated but a reason to overlook me. Because I didn't fall apart, because I didn't demand attention, I was deemed less deserving of it. That's not how love is supposed to work, Mom, I said quietly. It's not a finite resource that should be doled out based on who seems to need it more. And my independence doesn't make me any less deserving of acknowledgement or respect. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across my mother's face. Of course not, but— No buts, I interrupted. Do you have any idea how it felt to be seated in the kitchen? To be physically removed from the celebration as if I wasn't really part of the family? Can you imagine for 1 second how that might have hurt me? My mother's gaze slid away from mine, uncomfortable with the direct question. It wasn't meant as a slight, Emma. We were just trying to make the seating chart work with the limited space. Limited space? I repeated incredulously. Mom, I was the one who booked the venue. I know exactly how many tables could fit in that ballroom. And I know for a fact that table 27 was added specifically for the overflow people no one wanted. At the main reception. That's not— she began, but faltered, perhaps hearing how weak her defense sounded even to her own ears. It is, I insisted. And what hurts most isn't even the seating. It's that neither you nor Dad nor Olivia stopped for a second to think about how it would make me feel. It didn't even occur to any of you that I might be hurt by being excluded, because you're all so used to me going along with whatever works best for everyone else. My mother was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "What do you want from us, Emma? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry you were upset about the seating arrangement. But that doesn't justify what you did, causing a scene like that in front of everyone." I shook my head, a sad smile playing at my lips. See, that's not an apology. I'm sorry you were upset puts the problem on me and my reaction, not on what caused it. And for the record, what I want isn't just an apology. What I want is recognition. Recognition that I matter just as much as Olivia does, that my feelings should be considered, that my contributions to this family are valuable not just in practical terms, but because they come from me. My mother's posture stiffened further, her discomfort with emotional directness palpable. Of course you matter, Emma. Don't be ridiculous. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like I only matter when I'm useful, when I'm writing checks or solving problems or making things easier for everyone else. That's not true, my mother insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked softly. Then why was I in the kitchen, Mom? Why was I literally out of sight while Olivia celebrated with a wedding I largely financed? My mother stood silent for a long moment, the question hanging in the air between us. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to defend, her actions warring with the uncomfortable truth of my words. I don't know what you want me to say, she finally said, her voice softer than before. We made a decision about the seating. Clearly it was the wrong one. But you can't just blow up your sister's wedding reception and expect everyone to be okay with it. I leaned against the porch railing, suddenly tired. I didn't plan to blow up anything, Mom. I was hurt and angry, and yes, I could have handled it better. But can you honestly say you would have listened if I'd approached you privately? Would anything have actually changed? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course I would have listened. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Because I've spent my entire adult life trying to talk to you about the favoritism, about how it makes me feel to always be second to Olivia, and you've never once taken it seriously. It's always, that's just how siblings are, or you're being too sensitive, or Olivia needs more support right now. My mother's gaze dropped to the ground, and for the first time, I saw something like genuine regret cross her face. I never meant to make you feel that way. Intent doesn't change impact, I said, gentler now. I know you didn't wake up every day thinking, how can I make Emma feel less valued today? But that doesn't change the fact that your actions, your consistent pattern of actions, have left me feeling exactly that way. A car drove slowly past my house, the driver curiously eyeing the two women having an intense conversation on the sidewalk at 8 a.m., one still in her bathrobe. I suddenly became acutely aware of how this must look, and despite everything, a laugh bubbled up from my chest. What's funny? My mother asked, confused by my sudden shift in mood. Just this? I gestured between us. Having the most honest conversation we've had in years, out here on the sidewalk while I'm in my pajamas, and half the neighborhood is probably watching through their curtains. To my surprise, a small smile tugged at the corner of my mother's mouth. It is rather undignified. Heaven forbid we be undignified, I said, but without the bitterness that would have colored those words yesterday. Do you want to come inside? I have coffee. My mother hesitated, glancing at my front door. Is Megan in there? I saw her car. I nodded. She brought breakfast. Always did have perfect timing, that girl, my mother muttered, but not unkindly. She and Megan had a complicated relationship, my mother simultaneously approving of Megan's successful career in education and disapproving of her outspoken nature and influence on me. She can leave if that would make this easier, I offered, though I knew Megan would hate missing the rest of this conversation. My mother sighed. No, that's not necessary. I suppose we might as well have an audience for the rest of this discussion. I led the way back into my house, finding Megan exactly where I'd left her, though she had helped herself to another croissant and was scrolling through her phone with studied nonchalance. Mrs. Walker, she greeted, not even pretending she hadn't been listening through the window. Coffee? I brought extra. I'm fine, thank you, my mother said stiffly, settling onto the edge of a kitchen stool as if afraid it might be contaminated. An awkward silence fell over the kitchen. I busied myself pouring another cup of coffee, more for something to do with my hands than because I wanted it. So, Megan said, when the silence had stretched to breaking point, I hear Emma was seated in the kitchen last night. Megan, I warned. What? I'm just catching up, she said innocently. I mean, I'd like to think if I ever get married and Emma pays for half of it, I'd at least seat her somewhere in the same room as me. My mother's lips thinned. You always did have a flair for oversimplification, Megan. And you always did have a talent for complicating simple matters, Mrs. Walker, Megan shot back. Like the simple concept that all children in a family should be treated equally. Enough, I interjected, seeing my mother's face flush with anger. Megan, I appreciate the support, but I need to handle this myself. Megan held up her hands, in surrender. You're right. I'll just sit here quietly and pretend I'm not judging anyone. I shot her a look, but couldn't help the small smile that escaped. Even in the tensest moments, Megan's loyalty was a balm. I turned back to my mother. Look, Mom, I meant what I said outside. I'm not apologizing for what I said last night, because it was the truth. But I am sorry for how I said it, and for the timing. I never wanted to disrupt Olivia's wedding. My mother nodded slowly. I believe that you've always been considerate, even when... She broke off, as if realizing what she had been about to say. Even when others aren't considerate of me? I finished for her. She didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. "How is Olivia?" I asked, changing the subject slightly. "Really?" My mother's expression softened at the mention of my sister. "Upset, confused, embarrassed. Nathan's family had questions after you left." I winced, imagining the awkward conversations that must have followed my dramatic exit. "And Dad?" "You know your father," she said, which told me everything I needed to know. My father had likely retreated into stoic silence, his preferred method of dealing with emotional conflict. "And you?" I asked, meeting her eyes directly. "How are you, Mom?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. I don't know, Emma. I thought I knew where all the fault lines in this family were, and then last night happened and now I'm not sure of anything. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had ever said to me, and it caught me off guard. Patricia Walker, admitting uncertainty? The world really had tilted on its axis. "I know the feeling," I said quietly. My mother glanced at Megan, then back at me, clearly weighing how much to say in front of an audience. "Your father and I? We had a long talk last night, after everyone left. About you, about Olivia, about patterns we might have fallen into without realizing it. I felt a flutter of something in my chest, something dangerously like hope. And?" She sighed, her perfectly manicured hand tracing patterns on my kitchen counter. "And it's possible, just possible, that we may have sometimes been less attentive to your needs than to Olivia's." From Megan came a muffled sound that might have been a snort. I shot her another warning look. "I appreciate that admission," I said carefully. "But Mom, it's not just about attention, it's about respect, about acknowledgement, about being seen as a full member of this family, not just when I'm useful, but all the time." "I do see you, Emma," my mother said, a hint of defensiveness creeping back into her tone. "But you've always been so capable, so self-sufficient. You never seemed to need us the way Olivia did." "Everyone needs to be valued, Mom, even capable, self-sufficient people." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I suppose so." Another silence fell, less tense than before, but still heavy with unspoken words and years of accumulated hurt. "What happens now?" my mother finally asked. "Olivia wants to talk to you. Well, she has a lot of questions about what you said last night, about the money." I had almost forgotten that part. The revelation that I had funded most of the wedding, a fact my parents had apparently kept from Olivia. "I'm not ready to talk to her yet," I admitted. "I need some time. To process everything?" "She's your sister, Emma," my mother said, a hint of the old pattern slipping into her voice. "Olivia's needs prioritized, my boundaries challenged." "Yes, she is," I agreed. "And I love her. But that doesn't mean I'm required to have a conversation I'm not ready for just because she wants it now. When I'm ready, I'll reach out to her." My mother looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. "All right," she said instead. "I'll tell her you need some time." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful for this small concession. She stood then, smoothing her already impeccable slacks. "I should go. Your father will be wondering where I am." I walked her to the door, Megan tactfully remaining in the kitchen to give us a moment of privacy. At the threshold, my mother paused, turning to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I am proud of you, Emma," she said, the words coming out stiffly, as if she wasn't accustomed to saying them. "Of your business, of what you've built for yourself. I know I don't say it enough, but I am." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of emotion spreading through me. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick. "That means a lot to hear." She nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional tenor of the moment. "We'll talk again soon," she said, more a statement than a question. "We will," I agreed. And then she was gone, walking briskly to her car without looking back, her perfect posture a shield against the world. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Well," Megan said from the kitchen doorway, "that was something." "It really was," I agreed, pushing away from the door. "I think that's the first time in my adult life my mother has actually listened to me." "Miracles do happen," Megan said dryly, though I noticed she stopped short of an actual apology. I shrugged, moving past her back into the kitchen. Baby steps. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the Patricia Walker humility tour certainly won't be either. Megan snorted, following me. "True enough. So what now?" "Now," I said, picking up my now cold coffee. "I need a shower, clean clothes, and a plan for what to do about Olivia." "And Daniel," Megan added with a suggestive waggle of her eyebrows. "Don't think I've forgotten about that little reunion." Despite everything, I felt a blush creeping up my neck. It was one night, one drink. We just happened to be at the same wedding. "Uh-huh," Megan said skeptically. "And the fact that he just happened to text you afterward to make sure you got home okay? Pure coincidence." "It's called being polite," I protested. "It's called still being into you," Megan countered. "Trust me, I know these things." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't quite suppress the small smile that tugged at my lips. After the emotional roller coaster of the past day, thinking about Daniel was a welcome distraction. Even if, and that's a big if, there's still something there, this is hardly the time to explore it, I pointed out. I've just blown up my relationship with my family. I'm not exactly in a great place for whatever that might be. "Or maybe it's exactly the right time," Megan suggested. "You're finally standing up for yourself, setting boundaries, demanding respect. That's the sort of foundation you need for a healthy relationship." She had a point, though I wasn't quite ready to admit it. "We'll see," was all I said. After Megan left, promising to check in later, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tensions of the morning. As the steam billowed around me, I found myself thinking about what came next, not just with my family, but with my life. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to them, the responsible daughter, the supportive sister, the fixer, the problem solver. If I was going to redefine those relationships, set new boundaries, demand more respect, who would I become? In the process? Who was Emma Walker when she wasn't bending herself into knots to please her family? I wasn't sure I knew the answer, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. Wrapped in a towel, hair dripping onto my shoulders, I padded into my bedroom and checked my phone. More texts had arrived while I was in the shower, one from my father, brief and to the point as always. "Your mother told me you talked. Good. Call when you're ready." Several from Olivia, ranging from angry, "How could you embarrass me like that?" to confused, "Why didn't you tell me you were paying for so much?" to hurt, "I would never have put you in the kitchen if I'd known." That last one made me pause, a bitter laugh escaping me. So it wasn't wrong to seat me in the kitchen per se, it was only wrong because I had paid for the wedding. The implication was clear. If I hadn't contributed financially, the kitchen would have been perfectly acceptable. My worth was measured in dollars, not in my relationship to the bride. There was also a text from Daniel. "Been thinking about you? This morning. Hope things went okay with your mom. Coffee sometime this week?" That one brought a genuine smile to my face. Coffee. A normal, low-pressure suggestion. No expectations, no demands, just coffee. "Coffee would be great," I texted back. "Wednesday?" His response was immediate. "Wednesday is perfect. Lighthouse Cafe at 2? "See you there," I replied, the simple exchange lightening my mood considerably. I dressed in comfortable clothes, jeans and a soft sweater, clothes that felt like Me, not the carefully selected outfit I had worn to the wedding in a futile attempt to be noticed. As I dried my hair, I contemplated my next moves. I wasn't ready to talk to Olivia yet, that much was certain. Her texts showed no real understanding of why I had been hurt, only concern for how my revelation had affected her and her wedding. Until she could see beyond her own perspective, any conversation would likely end in more hurt feelings on both sides. My father. That was a different matter. His text, brief as it was, suggested an openness to discussion that surprised me. Robert Walker had always been a man of few words, content to let my mother manage the family's emotional landscape, while he focused on his work and his golf game. That he had reached out at all was significant. But even that conversation could wait. Today, I decided, was for me. For processing, for reflection, for beginning to map the new territory I found myself in. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and settled in my favorite reading chair by the bay window that overlooked my small garden. The autumn sunlight filtered through the leaves of the maple tree in my yard, casting dappled shadows on the grass. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the emotional tumult of the past hours. My phone rang, breaking the silence. Unknown number. Curious, I answered. Hello? Emma? It's Nathan. I nearly dropped the phone in surprise. Nathan? How did you get my number? From your dad, he said, sounding slightly uncomfortable. I hope that's okay. I wanted to talk to you about last night. My grip tightened on the phone. If Olivia put you up to this... She didn't, he cut in quickly. She doesn't even know I'm calling. I had no idea, Emma, about the money, about how much you contributed to our wedding. And I definitely had no idea about the seating arrangement until it was too late. His voice sounded genuinely distressed, and I found myself believing him. Too late how? Nathan sighed. I didn't see the final seating chart until people were already arriving. By then, it seemed like it would cause more problems to change things than to just go with it. But I should have said something. I'm sorry. The apology, so simple and straightforward, caught me off guard. Thank you, I said, not quite knowing what else to say. And the money, he continued. I thought your parents were covering what... We couldn't. If I had known you were contributing so much... You would have what? I asked, not unkindly. Declined? No, he admitted. Probably not. But I would have made damn sure you weren't seated in the kitchen for starters. And I would have thanked you properly, acknowledged what you did for us. I closed my eyes, absorbing his words. It wasn't that I had wanted constant recognition for my financial contribution. I had given freely, without expectation of repayment, or excessive gratitude. But Nathan was right. Basic acknowledgement, a simple thank you, and not being literally hidden away. Those weren't unreasonable expectations. I appreciate that, Nathan, I said finally. Really. And I'm sorry for disrupting your reception the way I did. That wasn't fair to you. Life isn't fair, he said, a hint of wry humor in his voice. As I'm rapidly learning. Did you know my mother cornered me after you left and demanded to know why the hell my new sister-in-law was being treated so poorly? She was quite impressed with your exit, by the way. That startled a laugh out of me. Really? Oh yeah, Mom's big on standing up for yourself. She said, and I quote, "That girl's got spine. I like her." The idea of Nathan's formidable mother, a retired federal judge with a reputation for suffering no fools, approving of my behavior was oddly comforting. Well, please thank her for the support, I said, smiling despite myself. I will. He paused, and I could hear him shifting the phone. Look, Emma, I know things are complicated right now with your family, but I want you to know that as far as I'm concerned, you're an important part of it. Whatever happens between you and Olivia or your parents, I'd still like to be family. His words touched me more deeply than I expected. In all the chaos of the previous night and the difficult conversations that followed, I hadn't considered what this meant for my relationship with Nathan. We had always gotten along well, but our relationship had necessarily been filtered through Olivia. The idea that he valued me independently, that he wanted a relationship with me regardless of the current tensions, it meant a lot. "I'd like that too," I said sincerely. "Good," he said, sounding relieved. "So, what happens now? With you and Olivia, I mean." I sighed, settling back in my chair. "I don't know yet. I need some time to figure things out. And honestly, she needs to understand why I was hurt in the first place. Her texts this morning suggest she's still missing the point. Give her time," Nathan advised. "Olivia doesn't do well with criticism, as you know, but she loves you, Emma. Once she gets past the initial defensiveness, I think she'll hear you." "I hope so," I said, though I wasn't as confident as he seemed to be. "But either way, I can't go back to how things were. I won't." "I wouldn't expect you to," he said, surprising me again. "You deserve better than that. We all do, really." A comfortable silence fell between us, the kind that only happens when two people are truly hearing each other. "Well," Nathan said, "finally, I should get going. We're supposed to be at the airport in a few hours for our honeymoon. Costa Rica, right?" I remembered helping Olivia research eco-resorts months ago, back when the wedding plans were still exciting rather than painful. "Right. 2 weeks of beaches, rainforests, and hopefully no family drama," he said with a small laugh. "Sounds perfect," I said, genuinely happy for him despite everything. "Have a wonderful time, Nathan." "Thanks, Emma, and thank you again for everything you did for the wedding. It truly was beautiful, and I'll never forget it." After we hung up, I sat, with my cooling coffee, turning the conversation over in my mind. Nathan's call had been unexpected, but healing in its own way. To be seen, to be valued, to have my feelings validated. It was exactly what I had been craving from my family all along. The irony wasn't lost on me that my newest family member, the one with the least history and the least obligation to me, was the first to offer a genuine apology and acknowledgement. There was a lesson in that somewhere, about chosen family versus blood, about the relationships we build intentionally versus those we inherit. I was still contemplating this when my doorbell rang for the second time that day, wondering if Megan had returned, or worse, if my mother had decided we needed another round of conversation. I approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. My heart stuttered. Olivia. She stood on my porch, still in traveling clothes, presumably what she had planned to wear to the airport before their flight. Her hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and even through the distortion of the peephole, I could see that her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. For a long moment, I just stood there, my hand on the doorknob, frozen with indecision. I wasn't ready for this conversation. I had just told Nathan as much. I needed more time to process, to decide what I wanted to say, to prepare myself for whatever accusations or justifications Olivia might offer. But as I watched, Olivia's shoulders slumped, and she turned as if to leave, defeat written in every line of her body. And in that moment, despite everything, my heart went out to her. She was still my sister, the girl who had climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, who had called me first when she met Nathan, who had asked for my opinion on every detail of her wedding, even if she hadn't always taken it. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened the door. Olivia spun around, clearly surprised. "Emma," she said, her voice catching. "I wasn't sure you were home." "I'm home," I confirmed, not yet inviting her in. "Nathan called. Aren't you supposed to be on your way to the airport?" She nodded, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "We are. Soon. I needed to see you first. To talk." I studied, her face, searching for signs of the anger I had expected. But all I saw was confusion, hurt, and something that looked almost like fear. "Okay," I said finally, stepping back to allow her entry. "Let's talk." Olivia hesitated on the threshold, as if unsure of her welcome even after my invitation. "Are you sure? I know you're probably still mad at me, and you have every right to be." The admission, so unlike my sister's usual defensive stance, caught me off guard. "I'm not mad, Liv," I said truthfully. "I'm hurt. There's a difference." She nodded, crossing into my house with uncharacteristic tentativeness. "I know, that's what Nathan said, actually, that I needed to understand the difference." "Interesting." It seemed Nathan had been busy this morning, not just calling me but also talking to my sister about the situation. I made a mental note to appreciate his diplomatic efforts when they returned from their honeymoon. I led Olivia to my living room, gesturing for her to take a seat on the couch while I settled into my reading chair. The physical distance felt necessary, a small boundary to help me maintain emotional clarity during this conversation. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. These two sisters who had shared a childhood, a history, a family, but who had grown into women who sometimes felt like strangers to each other. "I didn't know," Olivia finally said, breaking the silence. "About the money. Mom and Dad told me you were helping with some expenses, but they never said. They never told me it was that much." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly. "If you had known, would anything have been different?" Olivia looked genuinely shocked by the question. "Of course it would have. Emma, if I had known you were paying for most of the wedding, I never would have let you sit in the kitchen. That's insane." I winced at her choice of words. "So the problem isn't that you seated your only sister in the kitchen, away from the celebration. The problem is that you seated your financial benefactor there." Her brow furrowed in confusion. "No, that's not. I mean," she faltered, seemingly realizing the implication of her own words. "It shouldn't have mattered how much I contributed." "Liv," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle despite the hurt bubbling up again. "I'm your sister. That should have been enough for me to be included properly in your wedding." Olivia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You're right," she whispered. "You're absolutely right. And I don't. I don't have a good explanation. Mom was handling the seating chart, and she said you'd be fine with the kitchen table because it was quiet and you'd have more space, and I didn't question it. I should have, but I didn't." I absorbed this, not entirely surprised, that it had been my mother's decision. But that didn't absolve Olivia. "You didn't question it because it didn't seem strange to you that I would be seated separately from the rest of the family. That's the part that hurts, Liv. That it didn't even strike you as wrong." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Emma. I'm so sorry. Not just for the seating, but for everything. For taking you for granted. For not seeing how much you've done for me. For this wedding, yes, but for everything else, too." For the first time since she had arrived, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't the defensive, self-centered Olivia I had expected. This was someone who seemed to be genuinely grappling with her role in what had happened. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear." Olivia wiped at her tears, clearly trying to compose herself. "When you left last night, after what you said, it was like something clicked into place. All these little moments from our whole lives, things I never thought twice about at the time, suddenly looked different. Like how Mom and Dad always made it to my dance recitals but missed half your debate tournaments. Or how they threw me that huge graduation party but just took you out to dinner when you finished grad school." I swallowed hard, surprised that she had noticed these discrepancies at all, let alone remembered them now. "And it's not just them," she continued, fresh tears welling. "It's me too. Like when I borrowed your car for that road trip with my friends in college and returned it with an empty tank and a dent in the bumper. Or when you helped me move into my first apartment and I never offered to help when you bought your house. Or, she broke off, choking on a sob. Or when I made you sit in the kitchen at my wedding after you spent a small fortune making it perfect. The raw honesty in her voice, the genuine remorse, broke through the walls I had built around my heart. Liv, I said softly, moving to sit beside her on the couch. I didn't tell you all this to make you feel terrible. I couldn't keep pretending it was okay anymore. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know. And you shouldn't have. Had to. I should have seen it myself. I should have been a better sister. Her words echoed exactly what I had been feeling, what I had been needing to hear for so long. Not excuses, not justifications, just simple acknowledgement of the pattern and her part in it. I want to do better, she said, meeting my eyes through her tears. If you'll let me, if it's not too late. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. It's not too late, I assured her. But things do need to change. I can't go back to how it was before, always giving and never receiving, always supporting and never being supported. I don't want that either, Olivia said firmly. I want a real relationship, one where we're equals. For the first time that day, I felt a genuine smile spreading across my face. I'd like that too. We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us lighter than it had been in years. You should get going, I said finally, reluctantly. You have a plane to catch. Olivia nodded, but made no move to leave. Are we okay? She asked, her voice small. I know we have a lot more to talk about, but are we okay for now? I considered the question. Were we? The hurt of last night hadn't magically vanished. The patterns of a lifetime wouldn't be rewired in a single conversation. But the fact that she was here, that she had heard me, that she was willing to acknowledge her part in the dynamic, it was a start. A real start. We're okay, I said, giving her hand another squeeze. Not perfect, but okay, and that's enough for now. The relief in her eyes was palpable. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me another chance. That's what sisters do, I said simply. As I walked her to the door, Olivia turned to me one more time. Emma? She said hesitantly. I never said it properly, but thank you for everything you did for the wedding. It was more generous than I deserved. The words were simple, but they were exactly what I had needed to hear. You're welcome, I said. I did it because I love you, you know. I know, she said, her eyes filling again. I love you too. We hugged, a real embrace, not the perfunctory kind we had exchanged in recent years. And as I watched her walk to her car, I felt something shifting inside me, something healing, something hopeful. The conversation hadn't solved everything. There would be more discussions, more boundaries to establish, more work to do in reshaping our relationship and my relationships with our parents. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like that work might actually lead somewhere. That I might finally be seen, not just as useful, not just as the reliable one, but as Emma, a full and equal member of this flawed but still precious family. As Olivia's car disappeared down the street, I closed my door and leaned against it, exhausted, but strangely peaceful. In the space of 24 hours, my world had been turned upside down and then righted again, but on a slightly different axis. Nothing had really been resolved yet, but everything had changed. And somehow, improbably, I felt lighter than I had in years. The next few days passed in a strange kind of limbo. After the emotional intensity of the wedding and its aftermath, I found myself craving quiet and routine. I worked from home, focusing on client projects that had been neglected during the wedding preparations. I cooked elaborate meals for myself, something I rarely took the time to do. I went for long walks through my neighborhood, watching the autumn leaves drift from the trees in lazy spirals of red and gold. And I thought. A lot. My family reached out sporadically, tentative texts from my father, slightly less demanding, messages from my mother, a few postcard-perfect photos from Olivia's honeymoon in Costa Rica. I responded politely but briefly, maintaining the emotional distance I needed while I processed everything that had happened. By Wednesday afternoon, as I prepared to meet Daniel at Lighthouse Cafe, I felt steadier than I had in days. The raw edges of hurt had begun to soften, and in their place was a growing clarity about what I wanted going forward, not just from my family, but from my life. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, lunchtime crowds just beginning to thin as the workday continued. Through the window, I spotted Daniel already at a table in the corner, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He was absorbed in something on his phone, a small furrow between his brows as he concentrated. The sight was so familiar it made my chest ache with a strange mixture of nostalgia and something newer, less defined. He looked up as I approached, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Perfect timing," he said, gesturing to the coffee. "Just arrived. I remembered you like it with almond milk and cinnamon," I finished, surprised. "You remembered that?" Daniel shrugged, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Some things stick with you." I settled into the chair across from him, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Thank you. For the coffee, and for the other night. For getting me out of there when I needed an escape route." "Anytime," he said simply. "Though I hope your next wedding experience is less dramatic." I groaned. "God, don't even mention weddings to me right now. I'm still recovering from this one." His expression turned more serious. "How are you doing? Really?" I took a sip of coffee, considering the question. "Better, I think." The conversations with my mom and Olivia were difficult, but necessary. Nothing's fixed, but at least the issues are out in the open now. "That's a start," Daniel said encouragingly. "Sometimes naming the problem is half the battle." "That's what my therapist used to say," I remarked, then immediately felt self-conscious. "I mean, when I was seeing one. After the divorce." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "You were married?" I nodded, suddenly realizing that despite our history and the ease between us at the wedding, there were huge gaps in what we knew about each other's lives. "Briefly. To my college advisor's son, if you can believe it. Matt Pearson? We met at a department function right after graduation." "Professor Pearson's son? The one who was in medical school?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "The very same. We got married after dating for 2 years, divorced 14 months later. Classic case of seemed like a good idea at the time." I tried to keep my tone light, though the memories were still tinged with disappointment, even after all these years. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" I shrugged. "The usual. We wanted different things. He was focused on his residency. I was building my business. We both worked too much and talked too little, and when things got tough, we realized we didn't have the foundation to weather the storms." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." "It was for a while," I admitted. "But honestly, it was also a relief. We were making each other miserable by the end." "I get that," Daniel said with a rueful smile. "My engagement ended similarly. All the signs were there that we weren't right for each other, but we kept pushing forward because it seemed like the next logical step. Breaking up was painful, but it was also like putting down a heavy weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying." I smiled, appreciating his candor. "Exactly. Though I have to admit it did a number on my confidence for a while. Made me question my judgment." "That's understandable," Daniel said. "But for what it's worth, I think your judgment is pretty excellent." "Oh, really?" I raised an eyebrow. Based on what evidence exactly? He grinned. Well, you dated me. In college, for starters. Clearly a sign of impeccable taste. I laughed, the sound surprising me with its fullness. Careful with that ego, Harrison. It might not fit through the door when we leave. It was easy, this banter between us. Familiar and yet new, weighted with history but not defined by it. As we continued talking, moving from past relationships to our careers, our hobbies, our lives over the past decade, I felt myself relaxing further, genuinely enjoying his company in a way I hadn't enjoyed anyone's in quite some time. So the website business turned into a full digital marketing agency? Daniel asked, clearly impressed. That's amazing, Emma. I nodded, unable to keep the pride from my voice. 3 full-time employees plus a network of freelancers I work with regularly. We focus on small to mid-sized local businesses, helping them compete in the digital space without the massive budgets the big companies have. That explains how you could afford to fund most of your sister's wedding, Daniel observed, then immediately looked contrite. Sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up. It's okay, I said, waving away his concern. And yes, the business has done well. Though I'll admit, that particular expense wasn't exactly in my financial plan for the year. Daniel hesitated, then asked, Can I ask why you did it? Spent all that money on her wedding, I mean, especially if the relationship was already complicated. It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself repeatedly since the wedding. Honestly, I think I hoped it would change things. That if I did this enormous thing for her, my family would finally see me differently, value me differently. I laughed softly, shaking my head at my own naivety. Pretty foolish in retrospect. Not foolish, Daniel said gently. Human. We all want to be seen and appreciated by the people we love. His understanding, free of judgment or pity, touched me deeply. Thank you for that. Our conversation flowed easily from there, moving to lighter topics, a challenging project he was working on, a travel photography class I had recently taken, our mutual love for the small independent bookstore that had somehow survived the digital age in our old college neighborhood. By the time we finished our coffee, nearly 2 hours had passed, and I realized with a start that I hadn't checked my phone once, a rarity for someone who ran a digital business and was accustomed to being constantly connected. I should probably get going, I said reluctantly, glancing at my watch. I have a client call at 4. Daniel nodded, equally reluctant if his expression was anything to go by. This was nice, he said simply. Really nice. It was, I agreed, gathering my things. As we stood to leave, an awkward moment hung between us, that familiar end-of-date uncertainty, though this hadn't technically been a date. Or had it? The lines felt blurry in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. I'd like to do this again, Daniel said, resolving the uncertainty. Maybe dinner next time? The invitation sent a flutter through my stomach, a sensation I hadn't experienced in longer than I cared to admit. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Outside the cafe, we hovered on the sidewalk, still reluctant to part ways. I'll call you, Daniel said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, a gentle, almost tentative gesture that nonetheless left my skin tingling. I'll look forward to it, I replied, meaning that too. As I drove home, I found myself smiling, a lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my family situation and everything to do with the simple pleasure of connecting with someone who saw me clearly and liked what they saw. My good mood carried me through my afternoon client call and into the evening. I was just settling in with a glass of wine and a book I'd been meaning to read for months when my phone rang, my father's number flashing on the screen. I hesitated only briefly before answering. Hi, Dad. Emma, he said, his deep voice immediately familiar and comforting despite the tension of recent days. "How are you, sweetheart?" The endearment, rare from my typically reserved father, caught me off guard. "I'm okay," I said cautiously. "How are you?" "Been better," he admitted, an unusual candor in his tone. "The house is too quiet with Olivia on her honeymoon and your mother." "Well, she's been in a state since talking to you on Sunday." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. Was I supposed to feel guilty that my mother was upset? Or was he simply stating a fact? "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. My father sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of more than just the current situation. "Don't be sorry, Emma. Your mother needed the wake-up call. We both did." I nearly dropped my wine glass in shock. Robert Walker admitting he was wrong? Acknowledging a need for change? It was so unexpected I momentarily lost the ability to speak. "Emma? You still there?" he asked when the silence stretched too long. "I'm here," I managed. "Just surprised, I guess." "That I can admit when I've messed up?" There was a hint of wry humor in his voice. "I know I'm not always the most communicative, but I'm not completely oblivious either." "Could have fooled me," I said before I could stop myself, then winced at my own sharpness. But rather than being offended, my father chuckled, a low, rusty sound, as if he didn't use it often. "I deserve that," he acknowledged. "I've been complacent. It was easier to let your mother handle the emotional side of things, to go along with her decisions about family matters. But that was a cop-out. And what happened at the wedding made that painfully clear." I settled deeper into my chair, still trying to process this unprecedented openness from my father. "What exactly are you saying, Dad?" "I'm saying I've been a passive parent, especially as you girls became adults. I'm saying I let imbalances develop without intervening. I'm saying I should have noticed how you were being treated and done. Something about it long before it came to this." His words washed over me like a wave, powerful and cleansing. All my life, I had wanted, needed, my father to see me, to acknowledge the disparities in how my sister and I were treated. Now he was doing exactly that, and I found myself fighting back tears. "Thank you for saying that," I said when I trusted my voice again. "It means a lot to hear." "I should have said it years ago," he replied, regret evident in his tone. "The truth is, Emma, I've always been proud of you. Of your independence, your drive, your success. But I made the mistake of thinking that because you were capable, you didn't need the same support and attention Olivia did." "Everyone needs to feel valued, Dad," I said softly. "Even capable people." "I know that now," he said. "Or rather, I'm learning it. Better late than never, I hope." A comfortable silence fell between us, the kind that happens when truth has been spoken and received. "Your mother and I have been talking," my father continued eventually, "about patterns we've fallen into over the years, ways we've contributed to the situation. It hasn't been easy. Your mother struggles with criticism, as you know." I smiled despite myself, thinking what an understatement that was. Patricia Walker viewed criticism the way most people viewed invasive dental procedures, something to be avoided at all costs, and if unavoidable, to be endured with maximum resistance. "But she's trying," my father added, as if sensing my skepticism. "We both are. We want to do better, Emma, to be better parents to both our daughters." The words were healing balm on wounds I had carried for as long as I could remember. "I want that too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Good," my father said simply. "That's good." We talked for a while longer, about practical things like the timeline for Olivia and Nathan's return from their honeymoon, about my business, and a new project I was excited about the changing seasons and my father's garden plans for the spring. It was the kind of ordinary, comfortable conversation I had rarely had with my father, and it felt like a gift. As we prepared to end the call, my father cleared his throat, a telltale sign he was about to say something he found difficult. "One more thing, Emma. I want you to know that your mother and I will be repaying you for the wedding expenses. All of them." "Dad, that's not necessary," I protested automatically. "I gave that money freely. I don't expect—" "It's not about what you expect," he interrupted gently. "It's about what's right. We should never have allowed you to shoulder that burden alone, especially not without proper acknowledgement. So please, let us do this." I could have argued further, could have insisted it wasn't about the money. But I recognized the gesture for what it was. Not just financial restitution, but a symbolic recognition of the imbalance that had existed for too long. "Okay," I conceded. "Thank you." "No, Emma," my father said, his voice unusually emotional. "Thank you for giving us the chance to make things right." After the call ended, I sat in my reading chair for a long time, watching the play of moonlight through the window as I processed this new development. First Olivia, now my father, both acknowledging the problems in our family dynamic, both expressing genuine desire for change. It was more than I had dared to hope for in the immediate aftermath of the wedding confrontation. Only my mother remained somewhat resistant, though even she had shown glimmers of recognition during our sidewalk conversation. And if my father was right about their discussions since then, perhaps she too was beginning to understand the need for change, however difficult she might find it. For the first time since the wedding, I allowed myself to fully imagine what a healthier relationship with my family might look like, one based on mutual respect and equal valuing, where my contributions were acknowledged and my boundaries respected. It wouldn't happen overnight, I knew. Patterns established over decades wouldn't dissolve in a week of difficult conversations. But the foundation was being laid, and that was something. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Daniel. Had a great time today. How does Friday night sound for dinner? I know a place with amazing paella." I smiled, warmth spreading through me at the simple invitation. "Friday sounds perfect. I love paella." His response came quickly. "It's a date then. Looking forward to it." A date, an official one this time, no room for ambiguity. The prospect sent another flutter through my stomach. A mixture of excitement and nervousness that felt surprisingly welcome after the emotional intensity of recent days. As I got ready for bed that night, I found myself reflecting on the strange alchemy of the past week. How a moment of public confrontation, painful as it had been, had set in motion a series of events that were reshaping relationships I had long believed were fixed in their dysfunctional patterns. And how, in the midst of all that family turbulence, a chance reunion with an old love had opened up possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in years. Life was unpredictable. That way, I supposed. Sometimes the most difficult moments led to the most necessary growth. Sometimes relationships we thought were broken beyond repair showed unexpected capacity for healing. And sometimes people we thought were lost to us found their way back when we least expected it. Friday evening found me standing in front of my closet, surveying its contents with uncharacteristic indecision. What exactly did one wear on a first date with someone who had also been one's college sweetheart? Something new that represented who I was now? Something reminiscent of the style I'd had when we were together? Something that struck a balance between the two? "You're overthinking this," I muttered to myself, finally pulling out a deep burgundy wrap dress I'd always felt confident in. Simple, elegant, but not trying too hard. A good representation of the woman I'd become. As I applied the finishing touches to my makeup, my phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Good luck tonight. Remember, no talk of exes, no family drama. Just enjoy the paella and the eye candy. And I want details tomorrow. All of them." I smiled, typing back a quick response. "Yes, Mom. I'll be home by curfew, too." Her reply was immediate. "Don't you dare. Stay out late. Get some." I laughed, out loud at that, grateful for her irreverent humor and unfailing support. Megan had been delighted when I told her about the coffee date with Daniel and his subsequent dinner invitation, declaring it the universe finally getting something right for once. The restaurant Daniel had chosen was an intimate Spanish place. In Ballard, all warm wood and soft lighting, with the tantalizing aroma of saffron and seafood greeting us as we entered. The host led us to a corner table, slightly removed from the busier central area, perfect for conversation without shouting, over the ambient noise. "This is lovely," I said as we settled in, taking in the rustic charm of the space. "How did you find it?" "One of my clients is the architect who renovated the building," Daniel explained. "He insisted I try it when the work was done. I've been coming back ever since." Our server appeared with menus and wine recommendations, and soon we were sharing a bottle of Rioja and a selection of tapas while waiting for the main event, the paella that Daniel had raved about. The conversation flowed as easily as it had at the cafe, but with a different energy, a subtle undercurrent of anticipation that made every glance, every accidental brush of hands, feel charged with possibility. "I have a confession to make," Daniel said as we worked our way through patatas bravas and gambas al ajillo. "I looked up your company website after our coffee date. Walker Digital? Very impressive." I felt a flush of pleasure at his interest. "Thank you. It's been a labor of love, watching it grow from a side hustle to a real agency." "The testimonials are particularly glowing," he noted. "Especially that one from Harborview Brewery. What was it they said? Emma Walker doesn't just understand digital marketing, she understands people. That's what makes her exceptional." I laughed, embarrassed and flattered that he had not only looked up the site, but apparently memorized one of the testimonials. They were very kind, and slightly drunk when they wrote that, if I'm being honest. We'd just launched their new online store and sales were through the roof. "Drunk or not, they weren't wrong," Daniel said, his eyes warm as they met mine across the table. "You always did understand people. It's one of the things I admired most about you in college." The compliment caught me off guard, genuine in a way that couldn't be dismissed as mere flattery. Thank you. That means a lot." Daniel smiled, reaching across the table to briefly touch my hand. "I mean it. You had this gift for seeing past people's facades, for understanding what they really needed or wanted, even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. I'm not surprised you've built a successful business around that talent." I felt my cheeks warm, unused to such direct praise. "And what about you? Sustainable architecture seems like the perfect fit for the guy who used to rant about waste in conventional building practices." Daniel laughed, accepting the deflection with grace. "Some things don't change, I guess. Though my rants are hopefully more coherent now, and occasionally even persuasive enough to convince clients to invest in greener alternatives." "I'd bet they're very persuasive," I said, remembering how passionate Daniel could be when discussing subjects he cared about. "You always had a way of making people believe in possibilities they hadn't considered before." The paella arrived then, a magnificent expanse of saffron-infused rice studded with seafood, chicken, and chorizo, the traditional socarrat, that coveted crispy layer at the bottom of the pan, clearly visible around the edges. "Oh my God," I breathed, inhaling the fragrant steam rising from the dish. "This looks amazing." "Wait until you taste it," Daniel said, looking pleased at my reaction. "The chef uses his grandmother's recipe from Valencia." The first bite was a revelation, flavors melding together in perfect harmony, the rice maintaining its integrity while absorbing the rich broth, the seafood tender and sweet. I closed my eyes in appreciation, savoring the moment. "Good?" Daniel asked, though my expression had already answered the question. "Incredible," I confirmed. "Thank you for bringing me here." As we ate, Our conversation shifted to shared memories from college. The experimental theater production we'd attended where all the actors wore paper bags over their heads. The disastrous road trip to Portland where we'd gotten lost and ended up spending the night in a motel that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The late-night study sessions that inevitably devolved into philosophical debates about topics unrelated to our coursework. "Remember Professor Caldwell's ethics class?" Daniel asked, grinning at the memory. "When you demolished that guy's argument about ethical egoism?" I groaned, covering my face in mock embarrassment. Oh God, I was so self-righteous back then. Poor Brad never stood a chance. "Poor Brad was a condescending jerk who needed to be taken down a peg," Daniel countered. "And you did it with such precision. I think I fell a little bit in love with you that day." The admission hung in the air between us, neither of us quite sure how to navigate the sudden shift from nostalgic reminiscence to something more meaningful. "When did you know?" I asked finally, curiosity overcoming caution. "That you had feelings for me, I mean." Daniel considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "It wasn't one moment," he said slowly. "It was an accumulation of moments." "But if I had to pick one, do you remember that night at the lighthouse?" I nodded, the memory instantly vivid. We had been friends for months at that point, part of the same study group but nothing more. One night, restless during finals week, a group of us had decided to drive out to the lighthouse at Discovery Park for a break from studying. One by one, the others had drifted back to campus, until only Daniel and I remained, sitting on a driftwood log, talking as the light faded and the stars emerged. "You were talking about constellations," Daniel continued. "How your grandfather had taught you to navigate by the stars when you were a kid. You were so animated, pointing out patterns in the sky that I could barely see, even when you tried to guide my gaze. And I remember thinking, I could listen to her talk about anything for the rest of my life." The simplicity of it, the quiet, certainty in his voice as he shared this memory, touched something deep inside me. "I didn't know," I said softly. "How could you?" "I barely understood it myself at the time," Daniel replied. "But looking back, that was the moment I started seeing you differently. When I realized what I felt was more than friendship." I smiled, warmed by the memory and his interpretation of it. "For me, it was when you brought me soup." "Soup?" Daniel looked confused, clearly trying to recall the incident. "I had that terrible flu junior year, remember? I missed a week of classes and you brought me homemade chicken soup every day. Not just soup, but tea. And those awful action movies. You knew I secretly loved, and notes from the classes I was missing. No one had ever taken care of me like that before." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "I remember. You were a terrible patient, kept trying to get out of bed and work on assignments even though you could barely stand. And you kept pushing me back into bed and hiding my laptop," I recalled, laughing at the memory. "I was so annoyed with you." "And yet that's when you fell for me?" Daniel asked, amused. "That's when I realized someone could care about me without wanting anything in return," I clarified. "That's a powerful thing when you've spent your life feeling like your value is tied to what you can do for others." A shadow of understanding crossed Daniel's face. "Like with your family?" I nodded, appreciating that he had made the connection. "Like with my family. You were the first person who seemed to care about me just for being me, not for what I could provide or how I could help." Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "I still do," he said simply. The moment stretched between us, electric with possibility. For an instant, I felt myself on the edge of something momentous, as if the trajectory of my life might pivot based on what happened in the next few breaths. Then Daniel smiled, breaking the tension before it became overwhelming. "How about dessert?" The crema catalana here is almost as good as the paella." I smiled back, grateful for his intuitive understanding of when to push forward and when to ease back. "I could be persuaded," I said, "especially if it involves caramelized sugar." As we shared the dessert, a perfect crema catalana with a crackable sugar top that shattered satisfyingly under the tap of a spoon, I found myself studying Daniel's face, noting the ways he had changed and the ways he remained the same. The laugh lines around his eyes were new, as was the confidence in his bearing. But his eyes still crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and he still had that habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking deeply about something. "What?" he asked, catching me watching him. "Just taking inventory," I said honestly, noting what's different and what's the same. "And what's the verdict?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. I considered my answer carefully. I think the core is the same, the essential Danielness of you. But there are new layers, depths I'm just beginning to discover. It's like revisiting a favorite book years later and finding new meanings in it that you missed the first time around. His expression softened at the analogy. "That's a lovely way to put it. I feel the same about you. The Emma I knew is still there, but there's so much more now. I find myself wanting to learn all those new parts of you." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through me. "I'd like that," I said softly, "to rediscover each other, to see who we are now." As Daniel paid the bill, waving away my offer to split it with a "you can get the next one," that sent another flutter through me with its implication of future dates, I found myself marveling at the unexpected turns life could take. A week ago, I had been steeling myself for my sister's wedding, dreading the familiar patterns of invisibility and underappreciation that family gatherings typically triggered. I could never have predicted that the night would end with me walking away from those patterns, or that doing so would somehow lead me back to Daniel Harrison. Outside the restaurant, the October night was cool, but not unpleasant, the sky clear, enough to see a few determined stars despite the city lights. "Can I walk you to your car?" Daniel asked, ever the gentleman. "I'd like that," I agreed, slipping my hand into his when he offered it. We strolled slowly through the brick-paved streets of Ballard, neither of us in any hurry to end the evening. Our conversation had shifted to lighter topics, a new exhibit at the art museum we both wanted to see, a book we had both recently read, plans for the upcoming holiday season. When we reached my car, Daniel turned to face me, still holding my hand. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Emma." "So did I said, meaning it completely. For a moment, we simply looked at each other, the space between us charged with unspoken possibilities. Then, with a gentleness that made my heart ache, Daniel leaned in and kissed me. It was a tentative kiss at first, a question rather than a demand. But when I responded, lifting my free hand to rest against his chest, it deepened into something more certain, more promising. A homecoming and a new beginning, all at once. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Daniel rested, his forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since I saw you at the wedding," he admitted, his voice low. "Even during my public meltdown," I teased. "Especially then," he said with a soft laugh. "You were magnificent, remember? Standing up for yourself like that. It was incredibly attractive." I smiled, warmed by his words. "In that case, I should confront my family at formal events more often." "Or," Daniel suggested, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand, "we could just go on more dates, less dramatic, equally rewarding." "I like that plan," I said, leaning in to kiss him once more, briefly but with promise. "It's a date." As I drove home later, the taste of him still on my lips, I found myself filled with a quiet, steady joy. the kind that comes not from grand gestures or momentous occasions, but from the simple recognition of possibilities unfolding, of bridges being rebuilt to places once thought lost. The past week had been a journey through difficult terrain, confronting lifelong patterns, demanding respect, redefining relationships. But it had also led me to this unexpected place of new beginnings. With my family, with Daniel, and most importantly, with myself. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt fully centered in my own worth, not defined by what I could do for others or how useful I could be, but valued simply for being Emma. It was a powerful feeling, both grounding and liberating. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone lit up with a text from Daniel. Made it home safe, but already missing you. When can I see you again? Smiling, I typed back, soon. Very soon. And for once, I allowed myself to believe that sometimes things really could be that simple. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and autumn had given way to winter in Seattle. The holiday season was in full swing, streets decorated with twinkling lights that reflected in puddles left by the near-constant December rain. I stood at my kitchen counter, carefully arranging homemade gingerbread cookies on a platter while keeping one eye on the clock. "Need any help?" Daniel asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 wrapped gifts. He'd spent the night, something that had become increasingly common over the past months, and looked unfairly handsome in a green sweater that matched his eyes. "Just moral support," I said, only half joking. "Are you sure you want to do this? It's not too late to claim food poisoning and spend the day watching Christmas movies instead." Daniel set the gifts down and crossed the kitchen to wrap his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "And miss your first official Walker family holiday brunch as the woman who refuses to sit in kitchens? Not a chance." I leaned back into his embrace, grateful for his steady presence. Fair warning, my mother spent 20 minutes on the phone yesterday discussing the proper place settings. I think she's trying to compensate. "Sounds like progress to me," Daniel said, dropping a kiss on my shoulder before releasing me. One neurotic place setting at a time. He wasn't wrong. The past 3 months had been a journey of small victories and occasional setbacks as my family and I navigated our new dynamics. True to their word, my parents had repaid the money I'd spent on Olivia's wedding, though I'd immediately invested it in a college fund for any future nieces or nephews. My father had become unexpectedly vocal about ensuring equal treatment between his daughters, sometimes to the point of awkwardness. My mother still struggled occasionally, but was making genuine efforts to see me as I was, not as she had always assumed me to be. And Olivia. Olivia had surprised me most of all. Since returning from her honeymoon, she had made consistent efforts to balance our relationship, calling regularly just to check in, showing interest in my work, even defending me during a minor disagreement with our mother over Thanksgiving plans. It wasn't perfect, but it was real progress. "You know," I said, turning to face Daniel as I finished with the cookies, "a year ago, I would never have agreed to host a family gathering here. I would have been too worried about everything being perfect, about meeting everyone's expectations, about not measuring up somehow." "And now?" Daniel asked, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture that still made my heart flutter. "Now I know they're lucky to be invited," I said with a smile that was only partially joking, "and that my worth isn't determined by whether the cranberry sauce meets my mother's standards." Daniel laughed, pulling me into a proper embrace. "That's my girl. Speaking of which, when do you want to give them our news?" My hand drifted automatically to the delicate silver bracelet on my wrist, his gift to mark our decision to move in together after the new year. Not an engagement. Not yet, but a commitment nonetheless. A promise of more to come when we were both ready. "Let's wait until after dessert," I suggested. "Give everyone time to settle in first." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests. Daniel squeezed my hand once more before going to answer it. "Emma," Megan's voice carried, from the entryway. I brought mimosa supplies as requested. Oh, hey there, handsome. Looking cozy today. I smiled, listening to Daniel and Megan's easy banter as they made their way to the kitchen. It had been important to me that my chosen family, Megan, primarily, be part of today's gathering. Another boundary I had established in this new chapter. Family celebrations would include people who had earned their place in my life, not just those who shared my DNA. Nice spread, Megan approved, eyeing the brunch I had prepared. Though I notice you've got us eating in the dining room, not the kitchen. Pointed choice. Subtle, right? I said with a wink. About as subtle as a sledgehammer, she replied cheerfully. I love it. The doorbell rang again, this time announcing the arrival of my parents, followed closely by Olivia and Nathan. There were hugs, exclamations over the decorations, the slightly awkward dance of people still learning new steps with each other. My mother presented me with a poinsettia and a bottle of wine, her eyes scanning the room with that familiar assessing gaze. But instead of offering critiques, she simply said, "Everything looks lovely, Emma. Thank you for hosting us." A small thing, perhaps, but significant in its simplicity. Acknowledgement without qualification. Appreciation without expectation. As I led everyone to the dining room, I caught Olivia giving me a quick thumbs up behind our mother's back. Progress indeed. The meal passed in a comfortable blur of conversation and laughter. My father regaled us with stories of his latest gardening disaster. Nathan and Daniel discovered a shared passion for obscure sci-fi films. Megan charmed everyone, with tales from her classroom. And through it all, I sat at the head of my own table, in my own home, surrounded by people who were learning to see me, really see me, for perhaps the first time. When dessert had been served and plates were empty save for crumbs of gingerbread and smears of whipped cream, Daniel caught my eye from across the table, one eyebrow raised in silent question. I nodded, suddenly nervous, but also excited. Actually, Daniel began, reaching for my hand, Emma and I have a bit of news to share. All eyes turned to us, expressions ranging from my mother's barely disguised hope, she had been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about not getting any younger whenever grandchildren came up in conversation, to Megan's knowing smirk. We've decided to move in together after the new year, I announced, giving Daniel's hand a squeeze. Daniel's going to be giving up his apartment and moving in here. Oh! My mother's face registered surprise, followed quickly by an attempt to hide her slight disappointment that the news wasn't an engagement. That's wonderful, dear. It is wonderful, my father said firmly, giving my mother a pointed look before raising his glass. To new beginnings, and to having the good sense to recognize happiness when it comes your way. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, glasses clinking around the table. Later, after the dishes had been cleared, gifts exchanged, and goodbyes, said Daniel and I stood in our kitchen, working in companionable silence to load the dishwasher. That went well, he observed, rinsing a serving platter. Your mom only had that pinched look for about 5 seconds when we announced our living arrangement. I laughed, bumping his hip with mine as I reached for the dish soap. New record. She'll come around. She likes you, you know. Dad, too. I like them, too, Daniel said, surprising me a little. They're trying, Emma. It's not perfect, but they're really trying. I know, I said softly. That's all I ever wanted. Not perfection, just effort. Recognition. Daniel nodded, understanding as always. You got more than that today. Did you notice how your mother actually asked your opinion on her garden plans? Not Olivia's, yours specifically. I had noticed. Just as I'd noticed how my father had made a point of asking about my biggest client's recent campaign launch, a project I'd mentioned briefly during our last phone call. Small things, but meaningful, in their accumulation. It's strange, I said, handing Daniel the last glass to rinse. A few months ago, I was so hurt and angry I was ready to cut them out of my life entirely. Now here we are, hosting holiday brunches and making plans for the future. That's the thing about family, Daniel said thoughtfully. The real kind. Not just the DNA kind. It can bend and stretch and even break for a while. But if there's genuine love and effort on all sides, it can heal into something new. Something better sometimes. I dried my hands and turned to face him, struck once again by how this man, this second chance I'd never expected, seemed to understand exactly what I needed to hear. "You're pretty wise for an architect," I teased, sliding my arms around his waist. "It's all the blueprints," he replied with mock seriousness. "They give you a unique perspective on structural integrity and necessary renovations." "Is that what we're doing?" I asked, looking up at him. "Renovating our family structures?" Daniel smiled, that warm, crinkly-eyed smile that still made my heart skip. Something like that. But unlike most renovations, this one seems to be running ahead of schedule and under budget. "A Christmas miracle," I declared, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. And as the winter light faded outside, I realized that the wedding that had seemed so disastrous had actually been the foundation of something invaluable. A chance to rebuild relationships on more solid ground, to establish my worth independent of what I could provide, to claim my rightful place not in the kitchen but at the table. Sometimes you have to flip the table to get a seat at it. And sometimes, when the dust settles, you find yourself exactly where you were always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.